Greetings from Lviv, Ukraine. So this discussion of Lee versus Seagrams assumes that you've done the tutorials on complete integration and scope, and we're going to use this case to illustrate the normal inclusion test, right? So something's a complete integration if it's the complete and exclusive statement of the parties' obligations with respect to that particular deal, right? And a side agreement falls in the scope if, under the normal inclusion test, if parties would normally include the side agreement in the written agreement. That creates a rebuttable presumption it's in the scope, but you can show that it falls outside the scope if the presumption is rebuttable. We're going to use this case to illustrate how you might rebut the presumption. So let's get the facts first. The Lee's, this old man Lee, Joseph, what is his name? Harold Lee. I forgot. Old man Lee, Harold Lee, owns a liquor distributorship, and his two sons, Lester and Eric, own a 50% interest in the distributorship. And they sell the distributorship to Seagrams, and in the course of doing so, Harold Lee and the president of Seagrams orally agree that the sons will get Seagrams distributorships, right? Because old man Lee, Father Lee, is concerned about his sons having continued employment, so he and the president agree, fine, when Seagrams buys your liquor distributorship, Seagrams will give the sons Seagrams liquor distributorships. That's an oral agreement. It doesn't get put into the written agreement, and after the written agreement is executed, Seagrams refuses to give the sons liquor distributorships, and so the question is whether the oral agreement to give them the liquor distributorships is enforceable under the parole evidence rule. So now let's take a look later in the case about what the court says. Let's go down here. Yep, it's a little too far. And we do this. Okay, here is what we're going to use to illustrate the normal inclusion test. The case is not as clear as it might be about whether the court thinks the written agreement is a complete integration or not. We're going to assume it's a complete integration. Remember, that just means that the parties intended it to say everything about their deal that they wanted said with respect to the transfer of the liquor distributorship. And the question is, given that, is it still enforceable? Right? So, under the normal inclusion test, you would expect them to put the agreement about the sons into the agreement to sell the liquor distributorships. If that is really important to the father, Harold Lee, you would think, well, gee, that's important, an important part of the deal. Let's get that into the written contract. So, under the normal inclusion test, it would be presumptively in the scope of the complete integration, but you might rebut that presumption by the facts that the court looks at in this case. Let's take a little further down on the right here. We see several reasons why it would not be expected that the oral agreement to give Lee's sons another distributorship would be integrated into the sales contract, i.e. put into the sales contract. And they give a number of reasons. The one, I'm not so sure how strong this is. They say, right, the sons only have a 50% interest, and you normally wouldn't deal with that in the written contract. I'm not very convinced by that. If it was really important to Harold Lee that his sons have Seagram's liquor distributorships, why didn't he put it in the written contract? But more convincing, at least to me, is there was a relationship between the two old men, as the court says, Harold Lee and Yogman, the president of Seagrams, that made them both think that a handshake was sufficient to have the deal be binding. They knew each other well, they trusted each other. The two men, the president of Seagrams and Harold Lee, agree. They shake hands. Sons will have liquor distributorships, and both walk away thinking there's no need to put it in the written contract because it's already been agreed. As the court says, the two transactions may not have been integrated in their minds when the contract was drafted. That is, neither of them thought it was necessary to put it in the contract, although they both intended it to be enforceable. And finally, the court says the actual written contract does not contain an integration clause, right? The clause that says it's a complete integration. That has some influence, but we are assuming it is a complete integration and trying to argue that the oral agreement still falls outside its scope. And I think the best argument the court has is, well, here's a good explanation in terms of the trust of the parties why they didn't put it in. And this is a nice illustration of how to rebut the presumption that they would have put it in the writing, right? We grant, normally they would have put it in because it's an important part of the agreement, but here's an explanation of why they didn't. And this court seems to find that explanation compelling. No guarantee a court will, but that's how you would do it. Give me a good explanation of why it's not in there. Okay, that'll do it. See you when I get back.